Greetings, COM 705. This is Ben Frazier. I wanted just to do a quick mini lecture. It's Friday, it's late. I should have done this earlier in the week, but it's just been a really busy week trying to catch up and keep up with everything that's going on. Hopefully, I'll in the future be able to get to you earlier in the week with the lecture. This week we're finishing one of the Littlejohn and Foss's third major chapter. Again, remember last week I told you that those three chapters are so very important, where he talks about the different traditions, and that chapter probably needs to be read more than once. That's going to be a very key chapter. Please understand that Littlejohn and Foss take their ideas in part from Craig, and the next book we have is by Craig and Mueller, so obviously they'll use that to some extent as well. But those are not the only ways to organize the field, and one of the key things I want you to do in this class and walk away from in this class and know in this class and be able to confront people when you meet them at conferences or when you're on a panel with people or when you're writing in terms of understanding theory is to be able to hold your own in a conversation, be able to understand and communicate about communication. Okay, so there you go. So what I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about looking at some other books and some other articles and see how other people organize the field. Now, as you know, this is the 10th version of Littlejohn and Foss, and the first edition of Littlejohn and Foss, I don't know which one I had when I was doing my PhD, but it was somewhere towards the beginning. But I used Littlejohn and Foss both at Cal State Fullerton when I was doing my master's in communication, but then at the University of Washington when I was there. And I know others as well. Bill used Littlejohn and Foss, Dr. Brown rather, and I'm not sure about the rest. But they're all aware of it, and it has been used. It is probably the most used book, as I think I mentioned last week. So one of the things you have to do is know some definitions. And I love Littlejohn and Foss's definition here, and they pull it from Craig, and it's on page 44 of your text, and you might want to look at it. And it says, this is Craig, "I take a pragmatic view of theory. There is no one correct theory of communication, but many theories are useful for thinking about specific problems." And right there I want to stop to just he's echoing what many people have said, and probably what, if some of you haven't before, really feel a little frustrated about what is a theory and how do we find it and what's the right theory and how do you find a theory that takes account mass communication and technology and interpersonal and intrapersonal and all these different things and all these different smaller theories. How can you have, and in a sense, that's one reason why I believe we don't have a discipline, but we have a field, is because in my own understanding of the difference between a field and a discipline, a field is a general area of study of topical areas and all those things fit in it, but a discipline has an agreed upon definition, and so we don't have that yet. Now maybe someday we will. Now there are some things that do stand out, and you need to be aware of those things and look for them. And you also, and Littlejohn goes on, Craig goes on, the more theories you know, and I think this is great advice, the more different problem-solving options you have. So please don't, if I ask you, well, what is a theory? And you go, there's no theory, there's all of them, well, okay, yeah, but what are some theories and how would you use them? And you need to have some definitions at hand and be able to understand them, and what are some of the key parts to a definition. And so Craig is really talking about diversity in the field, and there is that. When Littlejohn first wrote his book, it was without his wife Foss. He really talked about the field as interpersonal, small group, organizational, public communication, mass communication, or cultural communication, family, health, and then political. And I don't even know if he had all those. A lot of times you'll find texts that start with intra and inter, and then maybe dyadic communication. So they start with the smallest elements or groups of communication and then move towards the larger audience types or mass media types. And you'll find people doing that. So I encourage you to look at the different ways. You need to come up with a way that you're comfortable with and you can defend. And one of the last assignments you're going to have in this class is being able to do that and to give me an overview of the field, defining the field for me. And ultimately, you need to be able to do that to hold your own in any kind of conversation. You might, be an interpersonal person, but you need to know something about mass media. In another text by, and there are several texts out here. This is one by Building Communication Theory by Dominic and Andrew and Deanne Warmack. Anyway, it's called Building Communication Theory, and I don't know what edition it's in now. This is the 2003. I just happened to grab off my shelf. They talk about certain things. First, they talk about understanding the nature of communication. And what they mean by that is to look at communication as a human symbolic activity. Now, right away, some of the mass media people go, wait a minute, you're talking human, you're not talking about symbols. What if one machine somehow communicates something to another machine? Is that communication? Well, this won't work for everything. Remember, what Craig's advice is that there's no one correct theory, but certainly there are a number of scholars that say I'm really interested only in looking at human communication between human beings, not communication between machines or something like that. Or perhaps there's a media involved in the process between two people, or more, but there needs at least to be two or more people. So human symbolic activity, and here they define things like signs, symbols, and rituals. If you're very interested in the ritual communication, you should look at James Carey. He passed away a few years ago, but an excellent communication theory book that he has written. From somewhat of a Christian perspective. I heard Carey speak. I think he was a Catholic, and he had some really good things to say. And that book has a lot of good things to say. So I recommend James Carey's book to you. Can't remember the name right now. I'll try to get it for you later on. Then other people, and another major issue in understanding communication theory is, and defining a communication theory is that communication is seen as a social process. And here we look at some of the areas of cognition and how that social process between people, there's social aspects between individuals and groups that make up the communication process. And then others who look at communication that involves corientation. So how two people parallel or mean the same thing when they communicate. Mutual understanding becomes very important in that particular model. And one of the things that model has been criticized for was not dealing enough with nonverbal communication. And so you get, it's a messy business, but anyway, these are some of the important issues that you need to be aware of as you're reading through this Little John text and later in the Craig and Mueller text. A fourth area to consider and think about, in ways some people have divided this up, is communication involves individual interpretation. I remember, and I like to tell this story occasionally, when I was a young minister just out of seminary many years ago. I was speaking on a Sunday sermon on the topic of God as our Father. And I had spoken on that before, and so I got my old sermons out, and I picked the best parts of it, and I looked at the Greek, and I looked at the Hebrew and the different areas of fatherhood, and I used that, and I put together what I thought was a great sermon. And when I was done, several women came up and said, I need to talk to you. Another one came up, I need to talk to you. And you shake hands afterwards. The minister sometimes says that and says goodbye and hi to the congregation and greets them. And so I had these three women waiting. One at a time, I talked to them, and every one had a story of how one woman said, I've never called God my father. My father abandoned me when I was a child, and it's just the most painful thing in the world to think of God as a father because of that experience that I have, that individual interpretation was very, very hard. Another person came up with her father had abused her, and then a third one came and said her father had accused her of something that she hadn't done, or she did, but she couldn't help. And so there was these kinds of things in understanding the meaning of that term. I realized that fatherhood, I had a father that was just very loving, very Christian. It was so easy for me to relate my earthly father to my heavenly father. He couldn't do that. Now, I'm not trying to preach here or anything like that. I'm just trying to use this as an illustration of how you take a simple term like fatherhood, but it has emotional sticky glue to it with many people. There are influences that term has. Just like other terms, like a lot of people like chocolate. Boy, you say chocolate and they just feel great. I've never liked chocolate in my life. And so when people go chocolate, I go yuck. And most people think I'm crazy. But anyway, there you go. So we're looking at that kind of shared meaning. And a lot of people take that approach when looking at how do we manage our communities and our individual lives, and how do we share meaning between people, overlapping meaning and that sort of thing. And then, of course, one of the major areas that I want you to think about and look at, and boy, I'm gone way longer than I thought it would, is the context. You can speak the same thing to two different groups, and the context of that group just makes the meaning so much different. And so these are the kinds of things that I guess there's one last thing that I'd like to leave you with and think about: intentionality. Does communication have to be intentional to be communication? Look at some other books. Please use this time to really get an understanding of what you can't know all the theories, and you can't know them all well, but you can know some of them and some in each area. And you'll be drawn to certain kinds of questions and certain kinds of issues, as I've tried to demonstrate several of the issues here that are important. You won't be drawn to all of them equally, but you should be aware of each and drawn to some and know those well, and be able to have a group of communication definitions and then theories attached to those definitions that will help you as a scholar, as a researcher, as a professor, as a person who is an expert in communication. All right, this is enough for this week. I will get a hold of you next week. One of the things I want to do is have a couple collaborate sessions with this class. And so watch for an email that I'll be sending out inviting you to a collaborate session. I don't want it to be the whole class because that'd be way too big. So if we can break it up in 2 or 3 groups, I'll do that, and then I'll try to be meeting with you next week sometime. In the evening. You don't have to go to those, but it'd be fun to get together and just have some interaction. Not a time for me to lecture as much as for us just to discuss some of the issues that we've been talking about online and in this class and that you've been reading about. And if you have any other questions, you can ask me. God bless you. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you at Collaborate and online. Bye-bye.